Can you all see this story map?
Yes.
Okay,
Perfect.
and I'm going to hand it over to Ben.
Thank you for the introduction, Greg, and highlighting that and all the work you and the rest of the Southwest Cask team, along with the funders, collaborators, and supporters put in to facilitate a unique and fulfilling fellowship. Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Davis, and I'm representing Scripps Institution of Oceanography of UC San Diego as one of the 7 institutions that comprise the 2020-2021 Southwest Cask NRWD Fellowship. This Southwest Cask Fellowship cohort met and collaborated completely online and came from a variety of specialized backgrounds, ranging from human exposure to wildfire smoke to DNA, barcoding, and marine ecology. But all members had pre-existing and continuous relationships and commitments with decision makers to produce actionable science. So in late 2020, and in the wake of the record-breaking megafire season, we determined that we wanted the fellowship to investigate forest management before and after these colossal staples of our generation to fit the year's theme of management in the aftermath of a landscape scale disturbance. This cohort tackled this project because it not only provided data-backed munition to inform natural resource managers, but also worked at an intersection of several crucially relevant issues. We aim to examine how the historical fire treatment by suppression impacted modern outcomes of 2 distinct regions through a Western and Indigenous lens to highlight the importance of an inclusive knowledge because our nation's past is a huge indicator that there is much to learn. As a final product for this fellowship, we created a user-friendly and free story map that spotlights the project's outcomes and also serves as a guide for this presentation. In this presentation, we draw lines between burn severity and vegetation health, with how we treat the land before a wildfire does occur, and also shed light on evidence suggesting fire regime shifting due to anthropogenic-driven climate change. These analyses will underscore our need to alter how we've been thinking about fires, in addition to adapting to the consequences of our own actions. And I've drafted a document detailing these needs. To incorporate the voices of the people that previously managed the land for millennia, we submitted proposals to both the Institutional Review Board and Karuk's Review Advisory Board that were approved and resulted in the Intentional Fire podcast, which you will hear clips of at the end. An analysis of modern fire management through several perspectives generated an abundance of knowledge displayed in this group's interdisciplinary work ethic and hopefully influences future use-inspired science where applicable. And with that, I'd like to hand the mic over to Sonia Delfin Perez to put our locations for fire analyses into a historical context.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Ben. I am so happy to be here. And I'm Sonia Delfin, and I am part of the University of Arizona. And I am here today to tell you a little bit about the historical context of fire. And we all know that fire has been used by indigenous people for many different reasons. And like, for example, they were burning landscapes to increase hunting success. They were also using fire to reduce, like those large wildfires, and also to maintain some cultural resources. However, what happened is that those very destructive fires that occurred many, many years ago and were affecting the timber industry and also residential development. And that was like the perfect argument to start promoting these fire suppression and fire exclusion policies. And however, what happened later in the 1990s is that the U.S. Forest Service started promoting prescribed burning as a way to manage forests. However, there were still some limitations to use prescribed burning. And around 2009, some tribes and NGOs were advocating for the expansion of the use of prescribed burning policies. And in a very innovative way, the Karuk and Yurok tribes were starting these programs to really promote cultural burning through interinstitutional alliances. However, I think it's very important for us to reflect on the connection between climate change and also these fire suppression policies, and try to see if there is any connection there. And for the situation that we are seeing right now, that there is an increase in burn areas, and also there is an increase in fire intensity in recent years. So we really need to reflect on that connection. And also it's very important to really understand this type of fire treatments. And I think Jacob will tell us a little bit more in the next section. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sonia. Yeah, hello, everyone. My name is Jacob, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about fire treatment. And what Sonia has really highlighted here is that a few large and destructive fires had a big impact on suppression in the 20th century. And as we experience the fires of today, I guess one of the questions we had is which fires will shape the future of our fire management? And which fires will give us insight into how we should be managing our forests? One fire that we think could provide really valuable insight is the Rodeo Chadesky fire. So this fire occurred in the Mogollon Rim, which is about central Arizona here. It burned a lot of acres, 462,000. We can see the footprint of this fire on the right. And what's really interesting about this fire is that it provides a really good case study of prescribed burns. So before the fire outbroke, prescribed burning was implemented in the region. We can see the regions that had no fire treatment in this light blue polygon. And we can see the regions that did experience prescribed burning in the dark blue polygons. And when we take a closer look, we actually see just really briefly that the regions which were treated burned less intensely than the non-treated regions. We can see some high severity burns indicated by the brightness value here. And those were more common in the not treated areas. Just to hammer this home, if we look at a scatter plot, the y-axis here is our brightness index. The blue values are the treated regions, an average of fire intensity for those regions, while the red are the non-treated. So we can see pretty clearly that the treated regions appear to have reduced burn severity. However, the timing of prescribed burn is also really important. So if the prescribed burn might have happened a long time ago, we can see that that impact may not have been felt for the burn severity. Another thing we're really curious in is how these forests might recover. And to think about how a forest might recover after a big burn, we also need to think about climate variability and change. So I'm going to jump to a section here. Again, really understanding how a forest can recover after a large fire also requires understanding how the climate is changing and the climate varies. So what we kind of found here, we're looking at NDVI, which is the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. And this gives us a metric of how green the forest is. This y-axis is NDVI here. The x-axis is years, 1 year before the fire, spreading to 9 years after the fire. The dark blue line is an average of the prescribed regions. And we can see that in contrast to the non-treated regions in red. The prescribed areas burned less intensely. They retained a lot more of their greenness that we can see here in the fire year. And importantly, they recovered to 100% of their historical values. So the forests seem to have fared better when prescribed burning was enacted for the Rodeo fire. One really interesting thing we can see here and the impact of climate might be that periodic drought can really influence the ability of these forests to recover. So if we go to 4 years after the fire, we can see that both the prescribed and non-treated areas had a hiccup. They stopped recovering. And this was associated with really low, below average winter precipitation. If we look at a little bit of a longer relationship between winter precipitation and summer greenness, we can see that these are really strongly correlated. And this suggests that changes to winter precipitation or periodic winter droughts can really impact the ability of a forest to recover in the summer. Now, we did a lot more work on this. I'm not going to be able to show it all just because of time, but just to kind of highlight the important point of this is that changes in winter climate can really impact the ability of a forest like the forest in the Mogollon Rim to recover after something like a large fire blows through. And in the full report, we talk about this more in detail, so you're more than welcome to check that out there. The important part of all of this is that it's complicated for management to think about all of these things and account for all of the changing climate variability, and the diverse ecology of the West. And to start thinking about this, the federal government really passed the FLAME Act in 2009, and they produced a document that we were really, really interested in, which is this National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. I'm only going to call this the cohesive strategy because that's too many words. And it has 3 simple goals that we think are really cool, to be frank: restoring and maintaining resilient landscapes, creating fire adapted communities, and implementing a safe and effective wildfire response. But we were curious, we wanted to read the document and analyze it and see if there were any things that might be missing from the cohesive strategy. And I want to come at this from a place of deep respect and understand that we are not the folks with our boots on the ground, but with some perspective and in our academic powers. After reading this national cohesive strategy, we found a few interesting things that we think could be improved. One of these is the incorporation of different and various knowledge systems. So we really think that wildfires require the employment of different knowledge, not just Western science, but also traditional ecological knowledge. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, because this is a big component of our project. But we think that the cohesive strategy could benefit by bringing Indigenous folks to the table and more explicitly including them in the management. Another one is adaptability. So the cohesive strategy isn't very explicit about the role of governmental and non-governmental actors and how they fit into the strategy. So this might be one thing that can help. And finally, transformability. This is one thing that ecologists are really thinking about now, is that we're planning for restoring the systems of the past. But what we really need to think about is that the future is not going to be like our past, and trying to adapt and manage for the conditions that we can expect with climate change will be really, really important. So I know I breezed through a lot of that. There are links to more in-depth reports that you can read here. And I will pass it over to Carly to talk a little bit about the process in us doing this science and some of the benefits of adding social science.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to see you. Thank you for having us today. So I am from UC Davis Native American Studies, and I was able to sort of represent social science and what the social sciences can offer to interdisciplinary research. And so in Native American Studies, we really envision Indigenous communities with independent social frameworks, and that these social frameworks and knowledge production systems will be able to offer solutions to things such as climate change. And here I just put a few charts of the methodology and theory that we use to think about having respectful and reciprocal relationships with Native communities. Here you see a chart from Indigenous story work, and Indigenous story work really shows that Indigenous people harbor their knowledge production systems in their stories. And it also really requires that we have reciprocity, reference, and this is holism, interrelatedness, and synergy when we are working with Indigenous communities. And furthermore, I also put the Indigenous research agenda here as well. So you can see that when we come from these angles, or from this methodology and theory, that Indigenous people are always thinking interdisciplinarily. Native science includes social factors as well as science factors. And in both of these charts, I think you can see that Native American Studies really considers the whole picture of an Indigenous person, and also really centers Indigenous knowledge as a place where we can really work together to create policy and create solutions to climate change. So that was sort of our theoretical and methodological part of the theoretical and methodological approach that we use to decipher that a podcast could be a good place where we could showcase Indigenous knowledge. And just a short-term way to say that would be like, I don't speak on behalf of Indigenous people. Indigenous people can really speak on behalf of themselves, and the podcast is one way to do that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Carly, and thank you to the Southwest CASC and to the USGS for this opportunity and wonderful experience. I'm going to be presenting a little bit on our podcast and giving you all a chance to listen in. So on each episode, we hear very different perspectives from Karuk people on cultural burning. It was an absolute privilege to be present for these conversations. Jacob, if you scroll down, we can, look at the photos of the people that we spoke with, and so it was a privilege to be there and to hear these conversations, and also to be able to contribute to a better understanding of this essential landscape scale process through these individuals' relationship to fire. Cultural burning has been practiced for thousands of years and has shaped the fire-adapted ecology of the Mid-Klamath Basin and so many other landscapes around the world. But beyond, that knowledge and the conversations themselves, one of the things that taught me the most through this process was called practicing Pikyav. So the Karuk tribe has a well-established policy for research collaborations, and that seeks to address the legacy of extractive research that's been practiced by academic institutions. And central to the practicing Pikyav is the protection of the tribe's intellectual property and their indigenous knowledge. And so we learned a lot about how to do that, and through this project. But it was also about protecting their time and energy. So, for example, this process required getting 3 different review committee members to sponsor our project, which the document explicitly said, that's a signal of whether or not this is a priority for the community. So this came with a lot of responsibility, and it required us to be very thoughtful about the way that we collaborated. And we put into practice many of the theories that Carly just described from Native American studies, as well as community-based participatory research and co-production concepts. So today, for the very first time, we are sharing a clip of the podcast episodes with you. Our partner, Vicky, is a member of the Karuk tribe, and she's continuing to tweak these and add her perspectives and her voice to these episodes. But we agreed together that today we could add our episodes to the story map and share them with you all. So the podcast will be officially released on platforms in spring 2021. And the tribe hopes that this will be the first of many series of podcasts on various topics related to cultural and natural resources. So now we invite you to enjoy a somewhere between 5 and 10 minute clip, depending how we're doing on time, from the first episode in the series called Fire Sovereignty.
And please let me know if you cannot hear anything.
I really just think this smashing us on the fire issue has just always been about colonization.
Welcome to the Intentional Fire Podcast. This podcast is a collaboration between the Karuk Department of Natural Resources and the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, or Southwest CASC. The Karuk tribe is located in Northern California along the Klamath River. This podcast records Karuk stories and perspectives related to cultural and prescribed burning, or intentional fire practices, and it builds off of a recent report called Good Fire. This report, commissioned by the Karuk tribe, describes the barriers to intentional burning and identifies potential solutions. The podcast gives voice to those impacted by fire suppression and fire exclusion, and it's an opportunity to learn from Karuk people about their relationship to fire. My name is Anna Mervite. I'm a graduate student at the University of Arizona and a Southwest CASC Fellow.
Ayuki, I'm Vicky Preston, and I'm a Karuk, Yurok, Paiute, and Pit River indigenous woman raised in Orleans, California, along the Klamath River in Karuk Aboriginal territory. I currently work at the Karuk Tribe's Department of Natural Resources as a cultural resources technician, and also am a graduate student at Humboldt State University. In this episode, I talk with Chukshu Kilman, Chuk and his family live in Orleans, California. Currently, Chuk works to educate and empower the youth of our area through various cultural activities and generally meeting the youth where they're at and being a good mentor. Chuk has a lot of life experience in activism, natural resources, cultural practices, and ceremony as a Karuk person. This interview was conducted in Chuk's newly built Akrivram, or traditional Karuk house that he built himself with the help of friends. It's special to be having our conversation here, as there are very few Akrivrams around that are accessible to families on the daily. It was exciting and beautiful to talk in this house amongst the cedar planks.
Thanks, Vicki. And now let's jump right into the conversation with Chuk Chuk Hillman from the Karuk Tribe Department of Natural Resources.
I'm Chuk Chuk Hillman. I'm from Orleans, California. I was born up Donahue Flat in Somes Bar, California. I've lived here pretty much my whole life, besides 2 years in Oregon.
Well, we can start talking about fire first. What is your own connection to fire, just in general?
I feel like my connection to fire is lacking, is my connection to fire. I use it all the time for cooking and for warming my home and during ceremonies and burning in the yard and things like that. But I really feel like I still don't have a strong enough relationship with fire. It still gives me that feeling like when you run into a rattlesnake on the trail, where sometimes it makes my heart kind of jump. When I'm doing broadcast burning, I still get like that fear when it really takes off and it goes whoosh, and I go woo 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 woo. So I feel like my relationship is lacking. It's probably a deeper relationship than the majority of people, but I feel like it's lacking. And but we've burned off the Tashunik place across the river that has been involved in treks and whatnot. And Tashunik is a super important place. The ceremony stopped happening. Let's rewind. Tashunik's one of our places that we do the Pikiawish. And it's a world renewal ceremony, but it was also a village as well. There's some ceremonial fire involved in that ceremony, but not necessarily how we have been using it. We've been doing it to clear the flat, so when we have a fire out there, the wind isn't going to pick it up and do it on its own. But we're still lacking the ceremonial component to the larger landscape scale burning that happens in correspondence with the Tashunik Pikiawish, just as well as the Kadimin Pikiawish. Me and my dad and a couple other people, kids, and we've burnt it off before, in August, and it's gotten scary a couple times. It's always worked out for me, but that's not to say I don't still. I don't know. I want to just say I only respect fire, but it still does have. It's got some fear over me, and it's like I said, you run into a rattlesnake, you go ooh, and instinctively, there's something in me still goes woo woo. So that's something I either need to get over, or that's like a safe boundary to have, or something, because I've actually gotten my best results when the fire goes whoosh. I've got, that's where the burn has looked the best in the hindsight, when I was just babying it, and I felt really safe. The material I was burning didn't really consume all the way, and the scary parts were the better parts of the burns.
Right. Anna, you want to go?
No, go ahead, Ben. Close us out.
All right. Thank you for illuminating that and all the time and effort you and the rest of the podcast team, along with the Karuk tribe, put in to organize such a wonderful product. So I'd just like to add a few words about the key points to wrap things up. So the Southwest Cask Fellowship Cohort pursued this project because it not only produced actionable science to inform natural resource managers, but also, again, operated at a convergence of several crucially relevant issues in qualitative and quantitative science. We found that burn severity and vegetation health were correlated with how we treat the land before a wildfire does occur, and also give rise to the notion that fire regimes have shifted due to anthropogenic-driven climate change, regardless of treatment. Although conclusions drawn from one ecoregion cannot simply be applied to another one with the analysis we performed, this project still presents more pieces to a framework for thorough and inclusive studies to come. The Intentional Fire podcast was a breath of true air, and inspecting modern fire management through several perspectives denoted this group's interdisciplinary specialties produce an abundance of knowledge and encompass the many voices of fire management. We would like to thank Nancy Huntley and Greg Garfin for being our intellectual and emotional leaders, along with the rest of the Southwest CASC and NRWD fellowship team. The full list of acknowledgements is on our story map right in front of you. And with that, I thank you for listening, and we'll hear from Dr. Nancy Huntley before we take some questions.